This is another of the projects from the Fabazine buttons, and this one is, I love doing this. This is one of my kind of passions, this kind of button art thing. So what you've got is you've got your background panel, and that actually, you can see there's a little bit left here and here, has got a hummingbird pattern printed on it. And what you're essentially going to do is painting by numbers, but instead of painting, you are sewing on buttons. That's what you're doing. So you follow the colours that are on the background and sew the corresponding colour of buttons on the top. So as you can see, I'm most of the way through this one, and there are tons of buttons in this kit. I have got an absolute ton left over, so I could actually go on and do another project or use these to accentuate whatever project I put it onto. So I'm just going to show you a couple of different techniques for actually getting the buttons on. So one is a technique that I've got here where I have layered the buttons on top of each other, but I've layered them in a way that it kind of looks like feathers, and anything that's in the background, say this wing here, which would be in the background, we just pop that one back under there and that one back under there, and anything that would be in the background, those buttons sit underneath anything that would be in the foreground. Like this wing here would be further forward, so those buttons are sitting on top of. And you can see here from this layer that I've got, these ones are kind of on their side a little bit. I'm going to get in a little bit closer so you can see that. So you can see these buttons are layered on top of the previous layer, and that's going to give me that kind of almost feather-like look. Now that's one method of doing it, and sewing the buttons on is very simple, and it's the same technique whichever way you do it. The other option you've got is to absolutely cover the base layer, and that's when these really big chunky buttons come in really handy, to cover the base layer, and then you sew additional buttons on top. That can sometimes be a little bit more difficult because if you've got larger buttons on the base, then it's sometimes harder to find those gaps. But what you can do is use the holes within the buttons, because all buttons, no matter what size they are, have the same spacing on the holes. So you can see that's quite a large one, and you've got your two holes there. That's the next, it's quite a lot smaller, but the holes will line up absolutely perfectly, and then smaller again, but still those holes will line up for you. So you can layer them up if you want to. I prefer to have it layered so I can actually get to the fabric all the time, to be able to add those different kind of different undulations to it and add the kind of direction in the texture as well. So if I flip this over, it's not pretty, but it does the job. You can also see that I've used a couple of different coloured threads in here. Now, there's reasons for that. I have just blocked mine out into three colours, and I've picked a colour that's going to match the buttons that are on the front. Let's pop that back round. There we go. So the reason I've done that is you can see these ones here, sorry about the wobble there, and these ones here coordinate beautifully, and you can hardly even see the thread. But then you can create a completely different effect by having a contrasting thread in there as well. So let's get a couple of these buttons sewn on. I did have a needle attached to this somewhere. There we go. So I tend to stitch through the buttons twice, and that's just to get a really good fix on them. And I'm going to start at the top here, and I'm going to put my stitching in the direction of my feathers. So you can see all the stitching on these, the stitching's coming kind of in this direction. So we're going to pop that there, and then just hold it in place, and then I'm going to stitch through from the back and just get a hold on that button. That's probably about where I want to be. It's a little bit more difficult with the camera in the way, but we'll give it a good shot. There we go. And you can use the buttons either way up as well, because that is actually the same button as this one, but you can get a completely different effect by turning them over, so do bear that in mind as well. So I'm going to stitch that. I need to be overlapping this previous layer, so I can probably just squeak in between there. So pop that through, and just squeak my way in between there. And then I'm going to go through it a second time just to make sure I've got a really good fix. There's no reason to be doing probably any more than that unless you're wanting a really kind of pronounced thread line and you're wanting something that's going to, you know, accentuate the threads that you're using. But 2 stitches is fine. And then I tend to try and do runs, so I'll come all the way down here, overlapping them as I go. So my next one that's going to go in will be this little sparkly one. Now if it's a 4-hold button versus a 2-hold button, process is exactly the same. I'm just going to go through it twice. So I'll do 2 on one side, then come across and do 2 on the other. Now I'm just using straight stitches on these, especially with these 4-hold buttons. If you want to do more fancy things like cross it over, or you want to add, I mean, you can do some lovely little fancy flowers and things with the 4-hold buttons, because you can do side to side there and there to make a leaf, and then up to the top and then French knot and make a little flower. So there's lots of kind of fun you can have with stitching them on, but essentially you are painting by numbers. So follow the colours that are on the background fabric and stitch all of those buttons in place. You will have plenty. As you can see, I've got tons left over there, and just have fun with it. Just have fun.